Nowadays, CGI can do pretty much anything, and it's pretty common to hear people complaining about its overuse. But it wasn't so long ago that people marveled at the novelty of even the smallest effect. These are the top 10 CGI effects before the year 2000.
Then man your ships, and may the Force be with you.
Starting us off at number 10, Star Wars: A New Hope. Yes, the spaceship battles were unprecedented, and lightsabers were pretty much the coolest thing since disco music. It was the 70s after all, but those actually weren't computer generated. But the trench run briefing was. This 3D model of the Death Star was slowly and painstakingly made by hand at the University of Illinois for the movie, and it was the second instance of 3D CGI in a feature film ever. And if these cutting-edge graphics don't immediately knock your socks off, remember that it's 1977 and people are still drooling over Space Invaders. And although more recent technology has given the original trilogy a more CGI makeover, we prefer to stick with the trench run. Next up at number 9, Tron. Just 5 years later, CGI had evolved to this. Tron featured almost 15 minutes of full 3D CGI used not as a futuristic display, but as the entire story world, including the now famous light bike duel. The 3D cuts inconspicuously with the live-action footage with only a little suspension of disbelief. Sure, it helps that the story logic calls for it to look like a video game and it lacks the polish of Tron Legacy, but it's surprising how watchable the sequence is today, mostly because the makers of Tron worked with their technological limitations, not against them.
Beyond the darkness, beyond the human evolution, is Khan.
At number 8, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Almost 30 years before J.J. Abrams and his gratuitous lens flares, The Wrath of Khan premiered a bevy of groundbreaking CGI techniques. Foremost among them were those used to create the Genesis effect, the 60-second continuous sequence that watches a wave of fire consume a moon and give birth to life was the longest of its kind yet. It also saw Lucasfilm's computer graphics group pioneer impressive-sounding wizardry like particle systems and fractal-generated landscapes in order to prove themselves. And what good did that do them? Just the attention of a rich guy named Steve who bought them out and turned them into a little company called Pixar. But before Pixar became Pixar, they had a few more records to set, including number 7, Young Sherlock Holmes. 3 years after Wrath of Khan, Lucasfilm tackled a short sequence where a stained glass knight attacks a priest with the help of a new hire named John Lasseter after he'd been fired from Disney. It took Lasseter and his team 6 months to create this sequence. And this is it, right here. What you're seeing right now is the whole thing, start to finish. But this was the first fully CG character ever created, which is a massive achievement for such a forgotten movie. Next up at number 6, Labyrinth. Not 1 year after the first CG character appears do we see the first photorealistic animal. No, not one of the Muppets, but the CGI owl at the very beginning during the credits. Okay, so it's not exactly photorealistic by today's standards, but compare it to the detail in Tron just a few years before, and it might as well be a photograph. And speaking of Tron, the owl was made by some of the same people who animated the Tron light bike sequence, which is going to become a theme here. The same few innovators driving an entire fledgling industry towards where it is today.
Sweet Christ almighty. I think it likes you.
At number 5, the alien water pseudopod from the Abyss. Long before James Cameron was reinventing cinema technology with Avatar, he was reinventing cinema technology with The Abyss. He hired Industrial Light and Magic to create the first ever 3D water effect, and whereas Sherlock Holmes took 6 months to create 10 seconds of footage, The Abyss managed 75 whole seconds in the same 6 months. It was also the feature debut of Photoshop, which has come such a long way from helping create groundbreaking animation to touching up sorority selfies in living rooms across America. But the effect would come in handy when, 2 years later, Cameron and ILM used the technology developed for The Abyss in number 4, Terminator 2.
Hasta la vista, baby.
This time with a running total of 5.5 minutes and over 100 CGI elements in order to create the liquid metal T-1000. And it's right here around the 1990s that the badass level really starts to ratchet up. The realism and creativity with which directors use CGI in this era still holds up today, which is certainly saying something, especially because while all the previous films on this list were rendered on gigantic supercomputers, Terminator 2 marks the first time the effects were done on a PC.
Girls! Let's just calm down. I'm sure we can settle this peacefully and... Whoa!
Next up at number 3, Death Becomes Her. So far, we've seen stained glass, owls, water, and robots, but no humans. There have been effects of all shapes and sizes, but what they have in common is a distinct lack of skin. And that's because skin is damn tricky. Not only is it an incredibly intricate texture that we're biologically programmed to have a heightened sensitivity to, but it doesn't pass light like other normal objects. It's actually semi-translucent, more like a candle than a baseball. It's why your face looks funny if you put a flashlight in your mouth. But Industrial Light and Magic checked that box off with Death Becomes Her, the dark comedy about immortal rivals, when Goldie Hawn knocks Meryl Streep's head in and she pulls it back out, stretching out her neck and yet again advancing computer graphics in the process.
You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
Closing in at number 2, Jurassic Park. It doesn't take much in the way of deduction to figure out we're talking about the dinosaurs here. And while practical animatronics and puppets were used in some shots, much of the dinosaurs were entirely computer generated, capturing Industrial Light and Magic their 13th Oscar. And it's the same wonder that Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler feel here that captivated audiences who looked up at the screen and for the first time ever saw humans walking with dinosaurs. And finally at number 1, the entirety of Toy Story. Remember that guy John Lasseter from Young Sherlock who spent 6 months on 10 seconds? Well, he stepped up his game. He went on to found Pixar and with them directed Toy Story, the first ever full CGI feature. And if you think that's cheating, consider that what was once basic 3D geometry had come so far as to capture the entire spectrum of human emotion in story form, paving the way for Pixar's string of CGI hits. This massive revolution in animation imbues this touching story with such energy and visual delight that it's still perfectly watchable today. It's timeless, which is why we think it's the best use of CGI of the last millennium. So what do you think? Were there any early VFX that we left out? Did you find some of these less than extraordinary? Let us know in the comments below and subscribe to Cinefix for more IndieWire movie lists.